Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take critical research, boil it down, and give you those essential insights you need. Basically, the shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're grappling with a concept that, honestly, changes how we need to think about conservation, ecology, maybe even evolution itself, biotic homogenization. We're diving deep into a really pivotal paper from 2004. It's called Ecological and Evolutionary Consequences of Biotic Homogenization, and lead author was Julian D. Olden with his colleagues. Now, back then, scientists kind of knew the patterns, right? They saw which species were vanishing and which ones were taking over. But this paper, its real mission was different. It aimed to push beyond just, counting lost species. They wanted to synthesize, to really understand the higher order consequences, the ecological and evolutionary ripple effects of this massive global shuffling of life.
Exactly, and that shift in focus is so important, because if you don't see it that way, you miss the real scale of the problem. Biotic homogenization, or BH as they call it, it isn't just about losing diversity points on a scoreboard. It's about making the whole planet biologically, more uniform. It's this global process where the unique native species in different places are gradually getting replaced by non-native species that are often generalists, species that thrive pretty much anywhere humans are, cosmopolitan species. And the result is this profound loss of what made regions distinct, floras, faunas. They're becoming more similar. This human-driven change is mixing up everything. Fish, plants, birds, insects, you name it. The authors even use these really powerful metaphors to get the point across. They argue this erosion has kicked off a whole new era. They call it the Homogene.
The Homogene.
Yeah, and creating what's effectively the new Pangaea.
The new Pangaea. That's a stark image. It suggests those ancient barriers, the continents drifting apart, allowing unique life to evolve. Those barriers are just functionally gone now.
That's the implication, that human activity has effectively reconnected the world's ecosystems in a way that overrides millions of years of geographic separation.
Okay, but when we say the world's becoming uniform, what does that really mean? Is it just about fewer species overall, or is the loss, deeper, more complex?
It's much deeper, and that's exactly why the paper needed to lay out a framework. If you just count species, you miss all the downstream effects, the hidden consequences. So the paper breaks it down into 3 distinct forms of homogenization. They often interact, of course, but they operate at different levels.
All right, let's unpack that framework then. So this feels like where we move from the big picture global mixing to the specifics, the actual mechanisms of how this mixing is, compromising life.
Yeah.
You said genetic, taxonomic, and functional homogenization.
Exactly. So taxonomic homogenization is the one people probably find easiest to grasp. It's the most common way it's looked at. It's basically about species composition. You track how communities become more similar over time in terms of which species are present or absent, often using something like Jacquard's coefficient. So if the fish in, say, the River Thames start looking more like the fish in the Mississippi than they did 100 years ago, that's taxonomic homogenization. Pretty straightforward.
Okay, makes sense. Same names on the species list in more places. What's next?
Then you have genetic homogenization. This one operates at a much finer scale, down at the DNA level. It's about reducing the genetic variability within a single species or among its different populations scattered across a landscape. Less genetic difference from place to place. We try to measure this with things like EST or by looking at alleles, the different versions of genes within a population. The tricky part here, though, is data. We often lack that crucial baseline information. We usually don't know what the genetic picture looked like before humans started moving things around, which makes it hard to quantify the full extent of the damage.
All right, you can't measure the loss if you don't know what you started with.
Yeah.
Okay, and the third type?
The third is functional homogenization. And this one is really interesting because it kind of ignores the species names and the DNA and focuses purely on what the species do, their roles, their traits in the ecosystem. It's about the convergence in the traits found in a community. What usually happens is that ecological specialists, those species with very unique, specific jobs, get replaced by widespread generalists. Generalists that can do a few common things okay, but they don't fill those specialized niches. So the range of jobs being done shrinks.
Okay, that feels really important. And that leads us right into our first deep dive area, this hidden thread of genetic homogenization. You mentioned it's driven by deliberate human actions, right? Moving species around, introducing them, sometimes wiping out local types, all messing with the fundamental genetic code.
That's exactly it. And one major consequence is what's called intraspecific hybridization. That's hybridization within a species. So when we intentionally move populations, maybe stocking fish from one hatchery into lots of different rivers, we end up mixing gene pools that were previously distinct distinct, that had adapted to their local conditions. It sounds like beneficial mixing, maybe, but it often isn't. It can swamp those crucial local adaptations that took potentially thousands of years to evolve, ultimately reducing the fitness of the populations.
Can you give us concrete examples, something from the paper that really shows this happening?
Sure, the paper talks about the global stocking of cutthroat trout, Oncorhynchus clarkii, a classic case. Stocking programs often used fish from just one or maybe a few sort populations to replenish fisheries across vast areas, across different river basins with unique conditions. This led to massive genetic homogenization, and the really tragic outcome was the documented loss of at least one genetically distinct subspecies. It got absorbed, essentially erased.
So in trying to help or manage the species, we actually destroyed unique evolutionary history.
It's a serious, often unintended consequence.
Now, usually you'd think mixing genes like that, especially swamping local adaptations, would make the organisms weaker, less fit. But you also mentioned invaders sometimes get more successful through genetic changes. How does less genetic diversity become an advantage?
Yeah, it's definitely counterintuitive. It often relates to something called the founder effect.
Yeah.
When a new population is started by just a few individuals, like in many introductions, there's a genetic bottleneck. Very little variation makes it through. But sometimes, particularly for social insects, this resulting genetic similarity can actually be a plus. The classic example they use is the Argentine ant, Linemethema humile, invading California. The populations that established there went through a severe genetic bottleneck. This resulted in ants across huge areas being genetically very, very similar. And the consequence? Reduced aggression between colonies. They basically stopped fighting each other.
Ah, so they recognize each other as the kind, even if they're from different nests miles apart.
Pretty much. It allowed them to form these enormous cooperative super colonies that just completely dominate the native ant communities in the ecosystem. The genetic simplification accidentally weaponized their social structure.
Wow. Okay, so that's mixing within a species. What about when different species mix? That's interspecific hybridization or genetic swamping.
Right. This is when two distinct species interbreed.
Hmm.
It can create novel gene combinations, sure, but it's a massive threat to endemic or rare species, especially when one species is introduced and much more common. It can literally wipe out a native species' unique genetic identity without directly killing individuals. They just get genetically absorbed. And this is particularly a huge problem in aquatic systems, fish, for example. Many have external fertilization, and sometimes the mechanisms preventing hybridization aren't that strong. So if you introduce a closely related exotic species...
That's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly, and it can happen incredibly fast. The paper gives this startling example from the Pecos River in New Mexico. An exotic pupfish, Cyprinodon variegatus, got introduced. And within just 4 years, it led to massive hybridization with a native Pecos pupfish, C. picosensis, across something like 430 kilometers of river.
4 years. That's astonishingly fast. The native gene pool just washed away.
Essentially, yes. Introgressive hybridization just swamped it. Gone in less time than a presidential term.
Okay, so the genetic consequences are clearly profound, losing unique lineages, disrupting adaptations, even creating these super invaders. Now let's pivot to that functional dimension you mentioned. This feels like a critical piece for understanding the impact on the whole ecosystem, right? That big changes can happen, even as the species list doesn't change that dramatically. It's about what they do.
Precisely. That's the heart of functional homogenization. You're replacing a diverse set of species traits, ways of feeding, moving, reproducing, tolerating conditions with a much smaller, more common set of traits. Usually, it's the traits belonging to those adaptable generalist species, the winners in human-altered landscapes.
So like losing specialized tools from a toolbox and just having a bunch of hammers left.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. You lose the specialized functions. The paper uses this conceptual model, which is quite helpful. Imagine a graph showing the distribution of all the traits in a community, maybe body size range or range of temperatures tolerated or types of food eaten. Functional homogenization basically chops off the tails of that distribution. You lose the extremes, the specialists with unique, rare traits. The whole range of functions compresses. And different communities, which used to have different trait distributions, all start to converge towards a similar middle-of-the-road set of functions.
Okay, chopping off the tails, losing the specialists. Can you give an example of what that looks like functionally in an ecosystem, making that trait idea more concrete?
Sure, think about something like pollination or seed dispersal. You might have native plants that rely on very specific native pollinators, maybe a certain bee species with the right body size, or a bird with a specific beak shape. If those specialist pollinators disappear and they're replaced by, say, the highly adaptable non-native honeybee, well, you still have pollination happening, but the function has homogenized. The honeybee might not be as efficient for certain native plants. It might favor others. It might change the whole competitive landscape for plants. The overall function becomes less diverse, less tailored, even if the basic pollination service seems present. Same thing with seed dispersal. Lose specialized fruit-eating birds, get generalist mammals. The way seeds move changes fundamentally.
Right, the quality and specificity of the function degrades, even if a generic version remains. So why is this functional simplification such a big deal for ecosystem resilience, for stability?
Well, think about that toolbox again. If you only have hammers, you're fine for hammering nails, but you're in trouble if you need to saw wood or turn a screw. Ecosystems with less functional diversity, fewer ways of doing things, fewer specialists adapted to different conditions, are less able to cope with change. They have fewer options when faced with disturbances like drought, disease, or climate shifts. Their overall ability to buffer against stress goes down.
Okay, less redundancy, less flexibility.
Exactly. But the paper points out something even more worrying: the synchronization effect. If communities across a whole landscape become functionally similar, if they all lose the same types of specialists and gain the same types of generalists, they start to respond to environmental changes in the same way at the same time.
Ah, so if a big drought hits.
Instead of some communities coping better than others because they have different functional traits, creating a kind of patchwork of resilience across the landscape.
Everything crashes together.
Precisely. You lose that regional level buffering capacity. The landscape behaves like one monolithic simplified system, highly vulnerable to large-scale disturbances. The whole new Pangaea feels the hit simultaneously.
Wow. That's a huge implication. It's not just local ecosystems failing, it's the potential for synchronized failure across vast regions. That impacts everything: agriculture, water, forestry, our own support systems.
So, pulling back again, if we're losing genetic uniqueness and functional diversity, what does this spell for the long-term evolutionary future? Are we locking Earth into a path of lower diversity forever?
That's the big unsettling question. The dominant view, based on how we understand speciation, is largely pessimistic. Most new species arise through geographic isolation, allopatric speciation. When populations get separated by barriers for long enough, they diverge. But human-facilitated dispersal is breaking down those barriers on a massive scale, or mixing everything up. This likely diminishes the potential for future speciation by reducing that necessary isolation. We might be short-circuiting evolution's primary engine for creating diversity. But is there any counter-argument? Any chance this massive shakeup could actually spur new kinds of evolution?
Well, there is that alternative perspective. Some argue that these novel environments we're creating, the homogenization along with new hybridization events, could potentially drive rapid evolution or even diversification in some lineages, particularly invaders adapting to new conditions. But honestly, that's still a major unknown. It's a big research question. The immediate, measurable impact seems to be the erosion of existing diversity and the potential limitation of future diversification.
And it's not even necessarily good for the winners long term.
Potentially not. The paper raises this interesting point. If ecosystems become too simplified through homogenization, the selection pressures might actually weaken. If the generalists face fewer complex challenges from specialists or varied environments, it could paradoxically endanger their own long-term adaptability and success. They might become victims of their own triumph, in a way.
So, to really get a handle on this and figure out what to do, the authors pointed out some gaps, right? Things we need to study more. It's not just about the biology.
Absolutely. A key point is integrating the abiotic context. We have to consider global environmental homogenization too. Things like climate change, widespread nutrient pollution, like nitrogen deposition, standardized land use practices. These physical and chemical changes also favor generalists and contribute to biotic simplification. The biology and the environment are homogenizing together.
Makes sense. The playing field itself is becoming more uniform.
Exactly. And we also need much more research on the impacts cascading through food webs. It's not just about the plants or the fish. It's about how simplification at one trophic level affects the others. They mention an example in box 3, I think, about rainbow smelt invading lakes. The invasion homogenized the fish community first, but then that change cascaded down, leading to homogenization of the zooplankton community, too, the tiny creatures the fish eat. The entire food web structure simplified.
Right, the whole ecological scaffolding gets weaker.
That's a good way to put it.
So, given all this complexity, the genetic threats, the functional losses, the potential for synchronized collapse, what's the takeaway message for management? What should conservation be focused on?
The paper really challenges us to move beyond just documenting species loss or protecting individual rare species in isolation. We need proactive strategies specifically aimed at suppressing functional and genetic homogenization itself. That means thinking at much larger spatial and temporal scales. It means placing a real premium on maintaining or restoring regional distinctiveness, ecological complexity, and functional diversity. It's about preserving the resilience and sustainability of entire ecosystems, not just the charismatic species within them.
Okay, so this deep dive into Olden and colleagues' work really drives it home. Biotic homogenization isn't just a simple head count of species. It's far more insidious. It's undermining the very functional and genetic foundations of ecosystems across the globe, creating a world that's potentially biologically blander, yes, but also much more fragile, much more prone to large-scale simultaneous failure.
It really does. The research forces us to see that resilience is actively declining in this Homogene era. We're losing those ecological insurance policies that specialization and regional uniqueness provide. And that demands a shift in conservation thinking away from just guarding the last few pandas, maybe, towards actively fighting the forces that promote this global uniformity.
It's like an anthropogenic blender, as some have called it, just mixing everything up until everywhere starts to resemble everywhere else. So what does this mean for you listening? Well, think about it. Continued human expansion, trade, travel, infrastructure. It all amplifies these pressures. It speeds up the blender. Understanding this process means recognizing that our choices, how we manage land and water, what we plant in our gardens, how we control invasive species, even our consumer habits, they either contribute to this biological mixing or they push back, trying to preserve the unique character of the places we live. Are we maybe unconsciously helping turn the crank on the homogeneous blender, or are we trying to protect what's left of that rich, diverse, pre-Pangea world? Something to think about. Thanks for diving in with us today.